Tom McShay is with us right now. He is, of course, one of the foremost NFL draft experts. Great to see you, dude. Hope everything is going well.
Sorry to kick off Kevin from Arkansas.
I started to think we were going to use your entire segment on Kevin. I thought maybe that was actually you, and that's like the pseudonym when you check into hotels or something, Todd.
Yeah, it's something I should look into. He's hot on that, man.
He is.
Appreciate his passion.
And here's the thing. No one's talking about it. That's not a rule change that's being proposed. But, hey, might come up again. So Kevin is now made very clear. All right, so we're 2 weeks out from the NFL draft. I'm curious just in the macro, too, because you've done this for so long. The sense I get talking to NFL people is that there's fewer elite, like truly blue chip players in this draft than some others, which kind of impacts some of the draft day maneuvering and the trades and things like that. I'm curious, first off, just where you kind of draw the line in your evaluations of who the true blue chip type talent is in this draft.
Yeah, I always kind of go about it with tiers, right? And I keep grades on every player, and so I can look back at different years. To me, like the elite top tier is Travis Hunter and Abdul Carter. It's two men at the top. So after that, though, I think an argument could be made, whether it's at the bottom of tier one or top of tier two. Mason Graham, the defensive tackle from Michigan, Ashton Jeanty, running back from Boise State, Tyler Warren, tight end from Penn State, and maybe Jalen Walker. I would put Jalen Walker right there next, the edge rusher and off-the-ball linebacker at Georgia. So when you look at those guys, like the next two from a lot of teams would be, well, Graham would be in there, but then also two players at positions that are not considered premium, in Tyler Warren and Ashton Jeanty. But I think when we start getting into the discussion of, do we take a quarterback at 2 or do we take a quarterback at 3, when the top tier guys, the blues or the blue chips or whatever an organization would call them, are sitting there, it's a difficult decision to make. And quite honestly, you always lean towards taking one of those elite type players and you see if you can get a quarterback later, or maybe this isn't the year for the quarterback. And I think that's why you've seen a couple of the moves that the Giants made. And I think that's why there's still a lot of talk when I have my conversations with friends inside the league, that Kirk Cousins is probably going to wind up in Cleveland.
I want to get back to that momentarily here, but let's start with Cam Ward at 1, because really the draft begins at 2 with Cleveland, which could add Kirk and then draft one of those blue chip players you're talking about. With Cam Ward, it's an interesting conversation because it sounds like if you put him into last year's draft class, I've gotten varying opinions of where he would have ranked. I'm curious for you, how good of a prospect, not just in this draft, because he's in all likelihood going to go number 1, but how good of a prospect is Cam Ward actually?
I think the conversation would have started at QB4 last year. A lot of teams would have had J.J. McCarthy. That doesn't mean all teams had J.J. McCarthy. Obviously Atlanta had Michael Penix. But I think the conversation would have started at number 4. There's no question in my mind, Caleb Williams, and we'll see what happens in year 2 with an offensive line that's been restructured and with the coach in Ben Johnson who comes in. It feels like the right fit for him. But Jaden Daniels, what he did was nothing short of remarkable as a first-year player. And then obviously, like, folks in New England are thrilled about the potential in the future for Drake May. So I think at number 4, but I also caution too, like the number 4 quarterback in last year's draft, that's a damn good player, right? And we saw what Bo Nix did in the right fit with the right coach and the right system with Sean Payton in Denver. And he was the 6th quarterback last year. So everyone who's like, well, Cam Ward would have been the 4th or 5th best quarterback last year. Yeah, but like, if you're in Tennessee, wouldn't you be pretty happy with what Bo Nix provided as a rookie?
Right.
You know what I mean? So I do think it's important to go in and kind of look at past years and try to give yourself perspective. But at the end of the day, we're talking about the quarterback position. And this is a player who's gotten better and better every year. From every stop, Incarnate Word, Washington State, and Miami, he took it to a whole different level. Most evaluators had at best 3rd-round grades on him last year. A lot of people had 4th and 5th-round grades. That's why he initially said he's going to the NFL draft and then wound up going back to Mario Cristobal and said, hey, does the offer still stand? Because when the committee gives out grades to underclassmen, the advisory committee that the NFL has put together has been very helpful for a lot of these young men. It's either a 1st-round grade, a 2nd-round grade, or go back to school. he went back to school and he thrived in that Miami offensive system. I think from an instinct standpoint, like when pressure's coming, feeling where the pressure's coming, knowing when to abort, but doing it not with panic, I think that's one of his superpowers. He waits, like almost like Mahomes will wait for the pressure to come, and now you've out-leveraged yourself, and it's easy to escape. That's what he does. And then the arm angles. And I also think when he's in rhythm and he gets to the top of his drop, his right foot is planted in, and the timing is there with the wide receiver, he's an absolute assassin. And I think when Brian Callahan looked at that and got that clip reel of those instances and said, we can get him to do more of this within the structure of our offense, like I worked with Joe Burrow, and this guy can be a damn good starting quarterback in the league. And that's what they're betting on. And that's why they didn't have the workout with Shedeur Sanders recently. And it signaled, we knew that they were going to take Cam Ward if they were at number one. To me, that signaled when they respectfully canceled the private workout with Shedeur that we're not even open for business with the number one pick to trade out of it.
And Shedeur's draft stock, where he ends up, it's one of the biggest mysteries going into this draft. I also saw your latest mock this morning, which reflected what I've heard too, which is that as much as, again, we can argue about the value and where they would have been in other classes, but I would not be shocked if Jalen Milroe ends up going in the first round. I would not be shocked if Jaxson Dart goes in the first. Tyler Shuck is even the other one who hypothetically, I think it's harder, the 7 years and the injuries and everything else, but he's done really well in the pre-draft process here. When you look at that next tier, how are you stacking those guys?
I've got Jaxson Dart just slightly ahead of Shedeur, and I think it's more of just the physical traits and what he can be, and I think it's more appealing to a multitude of NFL teams compared to, like, for Shedeur to have success, it's got to be with in the kind of like precision based offensive attack. That's why I like in this mock draft, I had Cleveland trading back up into the first round of pick 15. And we could dive more into the mechanics of all of that. But I just look at it from a football perspective. And whether I have Shedeur rated as QB2 or Dart as QB2, when you sit down and start looking at what could happen draft night, well, you have better context than I do, and this is your lane. But when I talk to people in the league, like, I'm not getting any sense that Shedeur's going 2 or 3 to Cleveland or the Giants. I also feel pretty strongly that he's not going to go to the Jets at 7. I think it's very unlikely that he goes to the Raiders at 6. So now all of a sudden you look at the top 10 and you say, all right, the Saints. That's the landing spot. QB2 could be the Saints. And then I look at the history with Kellen Moore. He's been the offensive coordinator the last 3 spots, right? Dak Prescott, Justin Herbert, and Jalen Hurts. The NFL comp, if you talk to a lot of people in the league for Jaxson Dart, is Jalen Hurts. And they're all kind of sturdy build, stronger arms, and mobile. And that's like the opposite of what Shedeur is, and it's exactly what Jaxson Dart is. And then you look at the pro days, and Kellen Moore didn't, as a first-year head coach, time is valuable. He's got a lot of things he's got to put in place. He didn't travel out to the Colorado Showcase. And I know it's one state over, but it's still a 6-hour drive or getting on a plane. He went to Jaxson Darts. So I start putting all these pieces together, and I just think it's if New Orleans goes quarterback at 9, I'll be shocked if it's not Dart. Let's put it that way. And now all of a sudden we're at pick 10, and Shedeur Sanders and the media circus that surrounds Coach Prime and his son and Travis and the whole program. Like, this is going to be a fascinating night. So 21's the next team that you can pinpoint, as you well know, that needs a quarterback. There's been some minor buzz about Miami at 13. I'm not sure about that. So then if Cleveland were to try to go move up, because Stefanski's a perfect fit when you talk about what he's worked with in the past, precision-based quarterbacks. What was it? McCown, I think, and Kirk Cousins, obviously winning like 11 and 10 games. He's worked with these guys. He's had success. That's his system. He doesn't need the big arm quarterback. He doesn't need the overly mobile quarterback. And so I think it would be a perfect fit between Stefanski and Shedeur, but you got to get it at the right value. I can't give up next year's 1 because if I liked him that much,
take him at 2.
I would have just take him at 2.
Right.
So some kind of deal. They've got 5 picks in the top 104. And if you maybe mortgage away a second or third next year with 1 or 2 picks from this year, move up. I put him at Atlanta at 15 because Atlanta only has, I believe, 5 picks in the entire draft this year. So I truly believe Cleveland's second pick will be a quarterback. And I would be surprised at this point, looking at all the private workouts they've had with all these guys leading up to the draft in this short window of time. I actually think that it's more likely than not that they wind up moving back into the first round to accomplish that goal.
And then obviously the Kirk Cousins piece of this, which any trade involving Kirk is not going to happen prior to round 1 of the draft. And so there's going to be a tell based on what they do in terms of how they view the overall plan of something that maybe even occurs before that draft ends on Saturday. And if we look a little bit deeper into the draft here, Todd, who's a guy or two that you're higher on than maybe what the public perception or other people in the draft community are seeing right now?
Listen, I know there's some like maturity questions, and he bounced around to like 5 high schools and 2 different colleges, or 3 high schools and 2 different colleges. I think Walter Nolan is an absolute stud along the defensive front, the Ole Miss defensive tackle. I think after Mason Graham, he's the second most talented interior defensive lineman, and he might be the third most talented defensive lineman in this class. Where's he going to come off the board is kind of the question. I look at teams, in that, like, could 12 be or 13 be a possibility with Miami starting in that range? I think he's going to go somewhere in the early teens. I really do. I think Walter Nolan, but I think people have kind of been cautious with that. And you look, the sack production hasn't been necessarily elite. But I think Walter Nolan is a lot better. I think Jahdae Barron, the cornerback from Texas, and yes, he played a lot of zone, and yes, he's got the shorter arms. Will Johnson is going to be a really good pro. He's great when the ball's in front of him. You can look at the pick sixes, some of the highlights, and some of the things he can do. I think Jahdae Barron, there's not 15 better football players in the draft. And I said there weren't 20 better players in the draft when Brian Branch came out, and he wound up falling to the early second round. So I think these guys, kind of because of the position they play, viewed as a nickel, the value isn't there, and I understand that. But I think when we look back on drafts, we're like, how did that guy fall? He's just such a good football player, right? And I think Barron's going to be one of those guys that probably belongs in the top 12, 13 picks in this class. But if you start going through the mock, like, it's possible he falls into the 20s.
You also had 2, not including Travis Hunter, who's a unicorn. I don't even call him a wide receiver. You have two pure wide receivers going in the first, which I think reflects the opinion within the league for a while now, which is that this is just not, in terms of the top-end talent, on par with recent classes here. When you look at Tet McMillan in particular, and the pre-draft process has not been ideal for him, is the tape good enough that someone's going to kind of do like what the Falcons did with Drake London a couple years ago, which is, yeah, he didn't run a 40, and everybody says he's slow. We don't care. Tape's good. We're taking him.
Tet McMillan's one of the toughest evaluations in this class because you'd have to be blind not to see the 6'4" and the 219 pounds and the length. And any slapstick could sit there and watch the highlights and see, the acrobatic catches are phenomenal. I know what he can be in that regard. And that's a pretty good thing. A guy where you can throw the ball up, contested catches. He's also really good after the catch. Drake took a year to become the guy that he was this past season in Atlanta, to become 1,000+ receiving yards receiver in the NFL. Drake had a little more dog in him, though. And I get almost a little offended in Drake's camp because I saw in Drake a player who was working his tail off to do everything right, attention to detail, was not a great route runner coming out, had a lot still to learn, former basketball background, all of that. Tet has a lot of the same special traits, okay? But it's hard to unsee some of the tape, and you go back to 2023, and you can excuse some of it away, but not finishing routes, not like the lack of attention to detail as a route runner. I just didn't see that same level of dog in him, if you will. And so I'm not as high on him as some people, but I still recognize the talent. I still think I would still draft him later in the first round, but I think he could go as high as 12, where I mocked him in this recent 3.0 to Dallas, because he, like, the complement opposite CeeDee Lamb and the opportunities for one-on-ones against some smaller defensive backs, and Dak being able to just put the ball up. I see that. I can envision the success there. But then I watch Matthew Golden, and I watch his attention to detail and the route running and the 4.29 speed and the fact that they needed someone to step up a receiver coming from Houston, and he did that in the big games and the big moments and the ability to adjust to the football. I just like Matthew Golden a lot, and Emeka Egbuka is going to be a really good slot. The more you watch of him, the more you understand his kind of subtle brilliance, if you will. I think those are the three guys you could hear their names called. I would take Golden over Tet McMillan, but I think McMillan is probably right now, like if you go to FanDuel or wherever, I'm sure the odds are higher for McMillan to come off the board than they are for Golden to be the first true receiver, as you said, in this year's draft.
So you got the new mock draft that is out, mock draft 3.0. I don't know what the paywall rules are and whatnot. So can you tell people how to find all your draft content here going into this draft?
I appreciate that, Tom. I don't like plugging my own stuff, but just Google it. It's the McShay Report, okay?
There you go.
You can subscribe. You can be a free subscriber. The mock drafts go behind the paywall. We're on, YouTube, Spotify. This week, I just gave out the whole thing on our show. It's, it was too much to share. We had 4 quarterbacks in the first round, 2 trades moving up to get these guys. And I haven't felt this good about a mock draft in a while, which means it's probably you could rip it up after 3 picks. But it was like a 3-day process of a lot of calls and putting pieces together. And just every once in a while, it feels like we're heading in the right direction. So we'll see. I'll screw it up by mock 4.0 the night before the draft.
Todd, thank you very much, man. Great stuff. Appreciate you being here.
All right. Thanks, brother. Take care.
Catch the Rich Eisen Show live weekdays from 12 to 3 p.m. Eastern on Roku Sports Channel in the U.S.